Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Lambda School's free mini boot camp. My name is Dan Frainer. I'm the instructor for the mini boot camp, and we are on lesson 8 today. So welcome. For those of you that are new that are joining us, we are on lesson 8, but we do have all of the lessons that we've gone through the last 7 days or 2 weeks essentially, recorded on our YouTube channel. So if you're just starting out now, feel free to hang out with us tonight, sit through this lesson. Some of it might not make sense to you quite yet, just because we've gone through quite a bit of stuff, especially with the JavaScript. But hang out with us tonight, and then feel free to go back and review all of the lessons that we've gone through so far. There is a GitHub repo that has all the assignments in it, and those of you that have been inquiring about joining the full-time Lambda School Academy of Computer Science program, this does count towards your prerequisite pre-work. So thanks for joining us, and keep working on this work. And once you have it completed, then you will be at that place that we'd like you to be before you start day 1 of Lambda School. Speaking of that, just want to talk a little bit about Lambda School and what we do here, especially for those of you that are just joining us. So Lambda School offers a 6-month fully immersive computer science program. Lambda School Academy of Computer Science really goes beyond any standard boot camp model that we are accustomed to seeing in the software world. Our goal is to deliver the material you need to be a software developer, and we also go deeper into computer science and give you a true computer science education as well. That's why it's a 6-month program. A lot of these other boot camps you'll see are much shorter. It's because they only offer the basic kind of coder stuff, and we really dive deep into computer science and really prepare you for a career in software development and engineering. It is a 6-month, excuse me, it's a 6-month program. It's full-time, Monday through Friday, and the first half of the program is kind of our web development, software engineering-based stuff. So you learn, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We dive into JavaScript frameworks like React and Redux. We go into backend. So we talk about Node.js development and database development. And we talk about DevOps and deployment. And then we switch gears and go into a real computer science portion of our program where, we go into C, we go into Python, we go into computer architecture, we go into a lot of really in-depth stuff that really, nobody else touches on. So that's that's a 6-month-long program. We have a start date the first Monday of every month. And so our next class starts on March 5th. And if you are planning on applying for that March 5th start date, it's coming up pretty soon. So please reach out, apply. We're running out of spots in that March 5th date. I'd like everyone in this mini boot camp that wants an opportunity to apply for that date to be able to interview for it. So please get your applications in quick. Spots are filling up. We've only got a few left. Other than that, if you are ready to apply for next month or the month after, please put your application in, get that process started. The sooner you start that process, the more likely it is that you'll be able to start on the date you want. So get your applications in, and we'd love to see you in the full program. So starting today, we are talking about JavaScript once more. Actually, for the next 4 assignments, we're going to talk about JavaScript. We're getting deeper and deeper into it. Let me share my screen. And we can get started. So So yesterday we started talking about objects in JavaScript, how to instantiate an object, how to build one. Let's say we just got an object equals, we use our curly braces, right? We talked about key value pairs in an object. So the key was the first item. We had a semicolon, and the value was any JavaScript data type, right? So we're just going to use string, and we'll say that's a string of value. They're all comma separated. Remember that. And I'll just do a name, Dan. We learned how to call key value pairs using the dot notation. So name, and we see that Dan pops up. We've learned to use the bracket notation, and we really learned that bracket notation works best when we use variables. So if we have a variable pointing to a property or a key, then we can use the variable in the bracket notation, and we'll see that it reads out the value of that key. We learned how to delete keys from key value pairs. We learned about for in loops to be able to iterate over every key in an object. And we learned about methods. And methods are simply a function that lives inside of an object. These are going to get a little more in depth with methods today. We can just turn hello world. And we remember that every time we want to run a function, even methods, we have to use our parentheses to run that method. And we'll see that it reads out hello world. So we talked about how everything in JavaScript is an object yesterday. We kind of went into a little bit of that. And like I said, just keep it in your mind and watch for these patterns to arise as we go through JavaScript. But tonight we're going to be talking about classes. And classes is all we're going to talk about tonight. They're really important items in JavaScript and in any kind of object-oriented language, which JavaScript doesn't confine itself to an object-oriented language or a functional language. JavaScript kind of lends itself a little bit more to object-oriented, but it can be either, just depending on the developer and how you use it. But we're going to talk about classes in kind of like an object-oriented way tonight. And we'll talk about classes, and we're going to talk about the prototype, which is an important feature of classes. So let's get started. Let me just do that. I'm going to throw my the object I made last night with my name on it, and this is my user. Remember, so we'll call this Dan user. So we have Dan user, and we have all of this data inside of it. We have these key value pairs. Remember, we have username, my username. We have password, my password. Don't steal my stuff. That's my actual password. We have loves JavaScript, and that's absolutely true. Favorite number, and we have a method on here that just says hi. We talked a little bit about the this keyword last night, and we're going to get a little more in depth with this tonight. But in this moment, this just means this object. So we can use this. It's a self-referential keyword that means the object that it's in to access other properties or keys on the object. So in this case, we're accessing the username, which is Dan Frainer, and says hi. And we can run that, and we see, Dan user. Change one thing, I need to change the other. And we can see Dan.Frainer says hi. So essentially, we've created this user template, right? And it's great. We have the Dan user. But what if we want to create another user? If we want to create another user, we're going to have to kind of copy this. We're going to have to get the data from the other user. Say we're going to call this Josh user. Josh has a different username. Simpson He's got a different password. We have to kind of go through, and now we have these two objects here. And what if we want to create another user? And now we have to kind of recreate this whole thing and do it over again. And next thing you know, our code's just getting massive with all of this, these users we have to copy and paste it. And it really kind of breaks one of the concepts in programming that we like to abide by, which is do not repeat yourself and keeping our code dry. And so essentially, when I created this Dan user, I just created a template for a user, right? And I can save this template and create as many users as I want from this template using a class in JavaScript. So those of you that have experience in other object-oriented languages like Java or C#, you're probably familiar with the concept of classes. JavaScript doesn't provide a true class system, though there is something very familiar to it. And we'll talk about inheritance and stuff like that. Actually, we talk about that in our full course. But right now, it's going to be really similar, and it's going to make sense. So the sake of argument, we're going to call our class objects classes here tonight. And it's instantiated in a pseudo-classical way, which I'll go over that in just a moment. And so let's do this. Let's create Dan user, but we're going to create it using a class. So the first thing we want to do, a class is created by using a function. So we've created a function, and when we create a class, we give it an uppercase name that tells other developers, and it tells us in the future, when we're going through our code and we're like, what does this do? That it's a class, and it's instantiated using the new keyword. We'll go over that in just a moment. So we're just going to give our class the name of user. We're going to give it just like a function does, and the user is going to take some arguments. All right, so let's go name, let's go PW for password, LJ for loves JavaScript, and favorite fave num. Okay, so now inside of here, what we're going to do is essentially create an object. Before we create an object, I want to kind of show you and tell you there's two parts to this, what we're doing here. So I'm going to, after I've created this object using the class, I'm going to use Dan equals, I'm going to use something called the new keyword. So NEW, and that's saying I want a new version of this class. And we're going to pass it the name, password, JavaScript, and favorite number. Okay. So now that we have this part here, I want to tell you what the new keyword does. So the new keyword is going to find that function, and it's going to treat it like a class. And the new keyword does a lot of really cool behind-the-scenes stuff for us that we don't have to worry about doing. But it also kind of abstracts a lot of what it's doing away and kind of gives it what we call JavaScript magic. I want to tell you what the new keyword's doing. The new keyword is going to run this function, but what it's going to do is it's going to create a new object and give it the name of this. So it creates a new object and it gives it the name of this. Then at the end, it returns this object. Okay, so that's what's happening behind the scenes. So it might be a little confusing when you see the code I'm about to write, but just know that before anything happens, it creates a new object with the name of this. And that's going to look like this equals object, right? So we're now going to have access to an object inside of this class. And then it's going to, at the end, when it's all said and done, it's going to return that object. So we don't have to worry about returning anything from this class. Now that we have an object with the name of this, we can use this to add keys and properties and methods to our object. We do that using our dot syntax. So we'll say this dot username equals, and we have a name that's supplied to us as an argument. So now we can just say name. We can say this dot password equals PW. This dot loves JavaScript equals LJ, and this dot fave or right number equals favnum. Oh. So this is going to, let's go over this again. And I'll save this up here for just a moment. So what's going to happen here is this function, remember, when it's called with the new keyword does all of the magic for us. If I had called this function just like without the new keyword, it's not going to do anything because it's not returning anything. It doesn't know what this is, doesn't have a context to any of this stuff. But when I use the new keyword on it, now the new keyword is going to go in and do some work before the function even runs. It's going to create a new object and give it the name of this. And so this is what it does essentially. Then we're allowed to add key value pairs to our object. And then without us even telling it, it's going to return that object. And so now we can see that we've are giving whatever returns back to the variable Dan. It's a constant, so that means we can't change it. So it's the variable Dan, and we're saying create a new user with this data right here. So this Dan Frainer is the first argument that's going to go get placed in the name. So name is going to equal Dan Frainer. Password is going to equal ABC123. LJ is going to equal true, and favnum is going to equal 42. We then go in and we set username to whatever name we passed in, password to whatever password we passed in, loves JavaScript to loves JavaScript, favorite number to favorite number. And then it's going to return that object. So now we have an object. And let's console log. Yeah. Now you'll see that we have an object, and we see up here as well that it's different than a normal object, and then it tells us the class of the object just in our console. But there's our object, right? Username, Dan Frainer, password, ABC123, loves JavaScript, true, favorite number, 42. So now we've created this object template. And now that we have this template, we can go through and create as many users as we want. Josh equals new user. And we're going to say Josh Simpson. Password is his password. Of course, he loves JavaScript. And 11 is his favorite number. A little bit wider. So now we can say console log Dan, console log Josh. Now you'll see we have two users here. One of Dan, we have all of Dan's stuff, and one of Josh, we have all of Josh's stuff, and they share the same keys and properties. So this is how we create a class, and this is called pseudo-classical instantiation, where we use a new keyword to use it. So just like adding all of these key value pairs to it. We can also add methods. So we had this say hi method, right? We did the same thing, this dot say hi method. We remember we're going to do equals because we're setting a property on an object. And so now we have the say hi method. Let's run this again. We're creating Dan and Josh, remember? And now they both have their method on it. Okay, so this is where this keyword is going to start to get a little bit tricky. All right, let's erase this. We know that it returns the object. We know that it creates the object. So this keyword, this keyword, is going to refer to the object that called it. So every time we create a new class, just like that, we're actually creating a brand new object. And that brand new object is going to have its own concept of this. Okay, so in this case, if I called Dan dot say hi method, what's going to happen here, let's kind of split these up a little bit. What's going to happen here is the say hi method is going to be on the Dan object, right? We see that it has one. It has a say hi method. And the say hi method, this is going to refer to the Dan object. And we can always, almost always, find what context this is in by looking at the dot. So we always say the object to the left of the dot is the object that this applies to. So when I call say hi method, it's going to look up Dan. Okay, Dan's a new user. Dan's a user class, and it's an object, and we see Dan over here. And it's going to say, does it have a say hi method? Sure does. It's right there. All right, call it. And it's going to go in and call this function. And this function is going to say, return this dot username. Well, this doesn't refer to this object. It refers to the object that was created. It refers to the object that called it. So it's going to say, okay, it says this dot username, and it's going to go, oh, what's this? This is the Dan object. Okay, what's the Dan dot username? Is Dan Frainer. Okay, so put that in there and put says hi. So now let's see what happens. And now we see Dan Frainer says hi. And we can do the same for the Josh. Say hi method. The Josh object has its own say hi method, right? And it has its own value of this. So say hi method is going to run on Josh. It's going to look to the left of the dot, find the Josh object, and then look up Josh.username, and we're going to find out that it's Josh.Simpson, right? And so let's get rid of that, and we'll see Josh.Simpson says hi. So it's just a good rule to keep in mind that whatever function you're calling, this is going to refer to what's left of the dot. Okay, so we can put both of these on. They'll both say their own thing. No longer do we have to write, this method for each and every one on their own object. It's already there. So that's where this keyword is going to start to get a little confusing. But I just want to reiterate that and just explain it once more, that when this method is called, it looks for it, and it says, what's to the left of the dot? Well, this is an object, and it has a username of Dan Frainer. So put that in there, and then says hi. And really the class instantiation here is just creating a new object for each time new is called. It's creating a brand new object and putting brand new stuff into it. And we can call this, 10 times. We can call this 100,000 times. All right. Imagine, a website or application like Facebook or Twitter, which have hundreds of millions of users. This comes in handy. They plug just the details in. Raj, new user. Raj, 1988. Raj has a password of 123 BCA. Because he is smart and has a secure password. Of course, he loves JavaScript, and his favorite number is 7. Okay, we can create as many users as we want using that new keyword and that class. So that kind of brings us to our second topic of the evening. And that is the fact that we can create hundreds of thousands of these classes, and each one is their own object. And that's fine. Like, that's what we wanted to do. That's what we build classes for. But there is one thing about building this class that kind of is a drain on our memory. And that's this function, this method right here. Methods are really expensive to create memory-wise. And, we have 3 classes here. We have 3 objects, and they each have 1 method on it. But what if this was Facebook or another huge, user base where there's probably hundreds of methods on each user? There's probably get friends list. There's get friends of friends. Look up invites. Look up events. Look up photos. There's probably hundreds of methods on each user that pertain to each user. And when we start multiplying, we'll say where there's 50 methods on each user times 100 million users plus. I know there's, billions of users on Facebook. You start to get into this astronomical, now you have 50 billion methods that are stored in memory, when all you really want to do is store that each method 1 time. And so that brings us up to something called the prototype. And every class has a prototype. So we remembered just a few minutes ago when I talked about the new keyword, how it does some behind the scenes magic for us. So it does this equals an object, and it returns this. Right, it does that magically for us. It also does one other thing for us. And it creates a property on each item called the prototype. This dot prototype equals an object as well. But the thing about the prototype is it's not stored on each and every object. It's only stored once on user. So actually it's not this, it's user.prototype. And it's given access. It gives each class access to the prototype. Using that, we can then take those methods out of each individual class and add them to the prototype. Prototype dot hi method. So we call the name of the class, which we see as a user. We say dot prototype, and we know that that is an object. So we can add a key to it, which we'll use say hi method, and we'll equal it to whatever the method is. So now that the prototype object has access to the method, that means every single instance of the user class, so Dan, Josh, and Raj, all have access to the user's prototype, and it's just given to them. And so now what this does is it doesn't create a new function every single time we're creating a new class. It only creates this new function once, but it gives access to every version of that class we have. So now when I say dan.sayHi method, let's do this. Let's get that Dan object back up there. So let's see, this is our Dan object now, right? We've created a new user. We've given it the data that we want to put in the class. It's gone in. It creates an object with all of these keys and the data that we've given it. And it returns that object. And we see in here that we have that object here. Username Dan Frainer, password ABC123, JavaScript true, favorite number 42, right? We don't see the sayHi method in here at all. But since Dan is a instance of user, it has access to the prototype. So when I call this dan.sayHi method, what it's going to do is it's going to find the Dan object, and it's going to say, oh, do you have a sayHi method on there, key? And it's going to go, nope, I don't. And so it's going to be like, huh, oh, well, I see that it's a user. So does the user prototype have a sayHi method key? And it's going to go, yep, we sure do. They're like, okay, cool, run that. Because we've done put our key in the ignition and turned it on. We've done our parentheses. We've called the function. So now it's going to run it. And this, once again, as we talk about our this keyword, now it's going to get even more abstract than this keyword, because this keyword is not attached to the user, right? It's not attached to that. So how does it know what this is? And if we think back to just 10 minutes ago, as we were talking, it's going to find out what's left of the dot. And what's left of the dot is the Dan object right here. So it's going to say, okay, I'm being run in the context of the Dan object. And now what's Dan.username? And it's going to be Dan Frainer. If there was no username on this, it would be undefined, right? So now when I run this, we're going to get Dan Frainer says hi. And that might be really confusing to you to think like, well, it wasn't on that object. It wasn't on the Dan object. That sayHi method wasn't. And this is touching into a bit of a advanced topic called inheritance. But just know that when the base class, right, this user class has a prototype, and we're allowed to add methods to that prototype, that every single instance of that class has access to that prototype. And so we are allowed to call methods that don't even exist on that exact object just because it is a copy of user. It is a user, right? And so we go back with Josh. Josh also has access to it. And we can with Raj. Raj has access to it as well. Even though that method is not on Raj's object. This is a really, we're getting into much more advanced topics right now. And so it's really, I want to let this sink in as to what the prototype is and what classes are and how we instantiate classes. Because this is getting into advanced JavaScript. And we're going to be using these. We use them quite a bit when we start talking about actual web development. And especially there's a really popular framework right now called React. And React is like all classes and it's all prototype. And we use it so much when we develop React applications. And that is something that we go into in the full-time program is, we delve deeper into the prototype and we dive really deep into React and other front-end frameworks, which all utilize this. Classes wouldn't, front-end frameworks wouldn't be possible if we didn't have classes. If we didn't have this way of consolidating a lot of our code and giving, functionality to objects. And so this is just adding functionality to an object, essentially. So, like I said, every single item in JavaScript is an object. And we've seen that, and we've used that quite a bit already. Let's look at console log all this stuff out. Just to kind of give you an idea of the prototype, there's a prototype on every data type. Everything is an object. So let's go, let something equal an array. 1, 2, 3. With console log something, and we'll see that there's 1, 2, 3, but there's no push or pop or shift or unshift or length. None of that exists, right? It's just an array with 1, 2, 3, yet somehow we have access to a method and we can do things with it. Well, this method lives on the array prototype. That's getting a little advanced, but I just wanted to show you kind of some, one more of those. We're going to start to see patterns and how this stuff exists and how we can have a method that is not on the object actually work for the object. So, push lives on the array prototype. Length lives on the array prototype. Even though it's not part of that exact array, it's on the prototype of the array. So kind of just to run through this once more, and then we'll open it up to questions. And this is all we're doing tonight. It's just working with classes, talking about classes, and talking about the prototype, because there's a lot to this. This is really complex stuff, even though this is, we've created a class and a method on its prototype in 10 lines. There's just so much to all of this right here. So let's go back through it. So a class, remember, is just an object template, essentially, with some cool functionality to it. We pass it, the arguments we want, the new keyword. We always use the new keyword to instantiate a class. And we know we can use a new keyword when we see an uppercase function, right? So we see this uppercase function. We know we can use the new keyword, and we know that it's going to create an object for us. We pass it the data we want to give to it, the name, password, loves JavaScript, favorite number, and it creates that new object for us, right? Let's go. Keep Raj up there. Okay, so we've created a new object. We've passed that object to a variable called Raj. And let's see. There's our new object. Boom, we got it. Username, password, loves JavaScript, favorite food. There's a user object right there. And it's got that user specific details into it. And we just use this over and over again and put each user specific details into it. And that's what a class is. That class creates a new object every time. When we want to add methods to a class, it's really not wise to add the method actually to the object itself, just because, as we know and as we talked about, you don't want to create the same exact function and store it in memory, possibly millions or billions of times. You want to create that function one time and store it in memory once, but you want to give access to every version of that class. We want to give access to that method. And so we use something called the prototype. And the prototype lives on every class. Right? Every class has a prototype. And so actually, let me open this up and I can kind of show you. And then we'll do a Raj. Now we can call Raj. And we're going to see that prototype doesn't exist. In a web browser, it automatically adds this to it, this object. And now when we open that up, we can see the say hi method is in there. But it's not saved on that object specifically. It's given access to it in the prototype. So just keep that in mind. And this, is the beginning of a much larger conversation about prototypal inheritance and chaining, and something that we go into in the third week now of our full computer science program at Lambda School here. We go deep into prototypes. But for now, we're just going to use for prototype for one class. And we can see that we have a hi method. We have access to it now. And so, and then we also talked about this. This, especially when we're called in this prototype way, refers to the object that called it. So whatever's left of the dot is the object that called it. And we know that Raj object has a username called Raj1988, and Raj1988 says hi. And so that's classes, and that's the prototype object with classes. And that's all we're going to talk about tonight. This is pretty deep stuff. I want that to sink in, and I want you to jump into the assignment tonight and start working on instantiating your own classes and building your own classes and adding things to the prototype. So that being said, please, any questions you have, post them in the questions channel on Slack, and I'll get to them right now. Are we modifying the prototype of user object globally or just in the scope of the function? So when we call user.prototype.sayHi method, that adds the say hi method to the user prototype, right? So anytime that user is created with new, we are giving the say hi method to that new object. Let's see if we have a little more. So it's not at the global level just because we didn't use the var. We have used function, right? And so that has created a variable for us. So when we say user.prototype, we're simply, it's just like how we would do this. User1 equals something, and then we could say user1 dot, say hi method equals, and then we can give it a function, right? Because we're just adding key value pair to that user. So that's all that that's doing right there. It's just like that, right? So is the function user being a class also considered the constructor of the class, or is the constructor different? This is referred to as a constructor. So we are using a class constructor right here. So class, and when we get into ES6 classes, which you will in the full course, we actually call a constructor method on it. But right now we're calling this a constructor as well. So if you see constructor on your assignment, just know that it means this. This is a class constructor here. Yes, it is weird seeing this from the perspective of other object-oriented languages. I understand that. This is, JavaScript in many ways tries to be many things. And it just really depends on your discipline and how you use it. And it can be used in a strictly object-oriented way. But there's a little bit of tweaking you have to do. So if you are coming from another OOP language, things might look a little weird to you, but this is the JavaScript way of doing it. So yeah, so James, yeah, that's correct. We can do that. You can create just as I showed you. Let's get rid of that class. You can create a new object, nothing on it, and then add things to it as you please, right? And new object dot password equals ABC123, etc. And now we have name, password, Dan, ABC123 are in that new object. So yeah. Cool. So that's a great question, Sean. I will go over that once more. So Sean asked if I could explain again why we need to use prototype rather than having the method within the object. So I'll give this the case of just you're building a website, right? And we'll just say that every new function takes up 1 KB of memory. That's extremely high. It's not that big. We'll just say it does that. You have bought a server space, and you have, a gig of memory to use. And so every time your server is running, if you put the say hi method inside of there, and you have 1 million users, right? So you build 1 million users. You have 1 million times 1 kilobyte in there. Now your gig is up, right? Your gig is gone. You've used it all up. But if you add it to the prototype, you only add it to memory 1 time. So now you've only used a kilobyte. Even if you have 1 million users, even if you have 1 billion users, this function, this one function, will only take up that 1 space in memory. Classes are used, I would say, more extensively on front end than back end. Classes are used so extensively for front end JavaScript, especially when you get into frameworks. React and Angular and Vue all use classes. We use classes in the back end too, but really it's a major part of front end development. Is best practice to use prototypes for all methods? Yes. When we're putting them on a class, absolutely. You put your method on a prototype every time. And this is kind of we teach this because this is what's happening when you start moving into ES6 classes. A lot of this gets kind of hidden from you. And so we like to teach this because we like you to know what's happening. When you use ES6 classes, which you will, it kind of does a lot of this automatically for you. So we don't really use this too much in real life development any longer, just because ES6 has hidden it from us. But we love to teach you this so you know what's happening, because that's a skill that people use classes every day and they don't really understand why. And so best practice is to add your methods to a prototype every single time you want to add a method to a class. If you're adding a method to a regular old object that you're only going to create once, you're only going to create that function once, right? And so also a regular object doesn't have its own prototype. Cool, let's get a couple more questions out here. Waiting for some typing. Take your time, guys. When will we use this in the back end? Just off the top of my head, creating models. So you brought up MVVM. So this will be our model. A class is our model, especially for databases. Something like Mongo, you create a schema. You essentially are creating your model. You create your class, and then we populate it every time we add something to the database. We have a couple more minutes for more questions. All right, that's going to do it for us tonight, guys. Like I said, this is some pretty heavy stuff. We're starting to get into much more advanced JavaScript now. I would consider this intermediate to advanced. And so enjoy your assignment tonight. Like I said, all the videos are up on YouTube. If you need to go back and rewatch this and see the syntax of how I wrote it, please go back onto YouTube. Otherwise, I'll see everyone on Monday evening. We're going to go into lesson 9, more JavaScript. And so we're actually going to spend the next 3 lessons on JavaScript into more advanced topics. And hopefully you're getting a lot out of this. And by next Thursday evening, 1 week from today, you should be able to build your first front-end web application. We're going to wrap it all up next week, and we'll get you building that stuff. Other than that, thanks for joining us this week and last, and can't wait to see you guys on Monday, and we will talk more JavaScript then. Thanks a lot, and have a great weekend, everyone.